pretty high proportion of guitar players are self-taught, and there's quite a few things we miss along the way by not having that kind of grounding in, a little bit of theory and some of the really general musicianship stuff we tend to skip over. So what we're going to look at today is something really important and probably the most useful thing I ever learned. And it's something that I didn't come across really until I'd been playing a few years and kind of just playing by ear and scrabbling around and finding out things by accident. And when I got this concept into my head, things got a lot easier as a guitar player, but as a musician in general. So this is all about understanding what a key is, what that actually means, and ultimately kind of how simple it is, this map, this kind of system of how things fit together and how we kind of make sense of them. And understanding this is really vital to being able to function with other musicians, to be able to learn other people's songs more quickly, more effectively, to have that sort of greater understanding of what's going on, of what it is you're actually doing, and applying it to the guitar and really understanding your instrument and how to get around that. So this is just going to be an explanation for any other people out there playing guitar or whatever other instrument who are trying to sort of piece this together and maybe haven't come across this information. There's nothing really complicated about it. It's not rocket science and it's not sort of complicated theory. It's really basic stuff, but it's the thing that I found really made the biggest difference to me along the way in being able to communicate with other musicians, to learn songs, write songs. So really what we're talking about when we're talking about a key is just a pool of notes, just a scale. That's the language for any particular song, any particular piece of music that you're working on, that you're playing. You've just got this pool of notes. That's your alphabet for that song, for that piece of music, that you're going to form everything from that. In the case of the major scale, which is what we're going to look at tonight, in understanding keys, you're really looking at 7 notes in a particular sequence that we're all pretty familiar with probably. And that is how we're going to build everything in a song, in any particular piece of music. That is how we're going to build our chords, all our melodies. Everything is just going to come from that pool of 7 notes. Okay, so as an example tonight, we're just going to work in the key of G for now. So we're going to play a G major scale. We're going to play 1 octave. The crucial thing here is now we're going to start talking about it in terms of numbers, in terms of degrees, by which I mean we're going to think of it, instead of the note names, we're going to think of it as this. We're going to think of it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we return back to the root note again, which you can think of as 1 or 8. So it's just that 7 different notes, and we really need to start thinking about them as numbers, as degrees. The Roman numerals you'll see if you're learning a piece of music, if you're looking at a chord progression. We need to know the note names as well. That's important, but the crucial thing for this lesson is we want to really think about them as degrees, as numbers. We want to think about them as the intervals. This is going to be really important to think of it this way when we start to learn about the chords in this key. So keep that in mind as we go through this. Okay, so one more time. This is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, that's it. That's our pool of notes. That's our key. That's all of it. So what we now have to do is think about how we build chords with this. There's our notes we can make a melody with. We can make sense of that. But most of us as guitar players, most of our job a lot of the time is playing chords in one format or another. And we need to have that under our fingers here. So in the key of G, which is those 7 notes, the G major scale, how do we form the chords? What are the chords we can use in a progression in the key of G? So all that we do to find that is we build a chord starting on each note of the scale. Okay, so on the 1, the root note, unsurprisingly, we're going to play a G major chord. That's our 1 chord. That's what we're going to refer to as the 1 chord from here on in. Okay, built on the 1st degree of the scale. All we're doing to get that chord is we're playing the root note with the 3rd degree of the scale on top of that. There's the 3rd. And with the 5th degree on top of that as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those play together. That is our major chord. That's all it is. It's 3 notes. The first degree, the root note, the third degree above, and the fifth. So we follow this same process with all the other degrees of the G major scale here to find our other chords. So on each degree, we're going to play a third and a fifth from that same scale alongside that root note, and that's going to give us our next chord. So on the second degree, yeah, there's the third above, there's the fifth above. So that gives us a minor chord, a root note, a minor third, and a fifth. That gives us a normal minor chord. So in this particular case, that's an A minor. So our first 2 chords in the key of G are going to be G major itself, the 1, and then the 2 chord, which we're now describing it as, is A minor. So for the rest of the key, we're going to carry on doing exactly the same thing. For the rest of the scale, on each degree, we're going to build a chord using the third above and the fifth above. What we end up with then is this series of chords, okay, of these types, and this is really important here. And I'll put all the charts for this at the end for reference. It always follows this pattern. In a major key, the 1 chord is major. So like I said, we're going to do this in G major. So the 1 chord would be G major. That's our 1 chord. The 2 chord is A minor. That's the second degree. The third degree happens to be B, and we're going to do a minor chord on that as well. Okay, so the first 3 degrees is 1. The 1 chord is major. The 2 chord is minor, A minor. The third chord is always minor. That's B minor in this case. Now, the 4 and 5, the 4th and 5th degrees, on those degrees we're going to build major chords, okay? So now what we've got is something that looks like this. We've got the 1 chord major. We have the 2 chord, A minor. We have the 3 chord, B minor. Now, the 4 and 5 are C and D. C major and D major. Okay? So, 6th degree now, we return to a minor chord. So the 6th degree is always minor, and in this case that's E, so we're going to play an E minor. I'm going to drop down for this one to keep us in position. Okay? The 7 chord is slightly different. When you play a third and a fifth above, staying within the notes within the scale, you end up with this diminished chord. So what we're going to end up playing here is an F sharp diminished. So we're going to play this. This is our key. The 1 chord major, 2 chord minor, 3 chord minor, the 4 chord is major, the 5 chord is major, 6 chord is minor, 7 chord is this diminished chord, and we're back to the root chord again, back to the 1. So it always follows that pattern, okay? It doesn't matter really about the note names now, or what key we're playing in. That formula is going to follow every time. So in a major key, when we're using the major scale as our key, as our language, the chord built on the 1st degree is major. The chords built on the 2 and 3 are minor. Chords built on 4 and 5 are majors again. The 6 is minor. The 7 is diminished or half diminished. We'll come back to that. And we return to the root again, and it's a major chord, okay, to resolve. So it looks like this. Okay, so the most important thing, the most useful thing now is that we can do with this is that we can play this formula, this system in any key. So we've done it in G as an example, but we don't just have to know those notes, we can move things around. Now if we can remember that formula, that pattern, and think of those degrees and the chord types we build on them, we now know the system in any key on the guitar. And if we know some bar chords and we can move things around on the neck, we can play in any key and play all 7 chords in that key. So an example, let's do the whole thing again in B flat. So again, our source material, our alphabet here is B flat major scale. So we're going to play the same major scale pattern, but just up here on the 6th fret starting on B flat. Okay, 1 through 7 there. So our 1 chord again will be major. Our 2 chord will be minor. Our 3 chord will be minor. our 4 chord will be major, 5 chord is major, 6 chord minor, 7 chord half diminished. So coming back to the idea of thinking of this as numbers, as degrees rather than the note names, or alongside that rather, this allows us to start really getting an understanding of chord progressions a lot more easily. So we're now starting to think about, what does a 1-4-5 progression mean? What does a 2-5-1 progression mean when we see these things referred to? Well, if we go back to our original key and we just play through the system we've just described, so a 1-4-5 progression, it just means that you're playing the 1 chord. Let's do this again in G. The 4 chord and the 5 chord in some sort of running order, some sort of sequence. It's a very familiar pattern. Another very common one would be a 2-5-1. So again, in this particular case, you're using the chord built on the 2nd degree, the chord built on the 5th degree, and then returning back to the chord on the 1st degree. So that would sound a bit more like... And by thinking in this way and getting familiar with this, we start to see these patterns emerging in all of these songs that we hear. We start to hear it all the time. You start to hear those intervals moving around. You start to hear these common progressions and formulas repeating themselves. And having that understanding makes it so much easier to, pick up a new tune, learn a new song by ear, or if you see something written, you can very quickly decipher what's going to happen next. Once you've got some understanding of this, playing in a major key, and seeing how that all slots together and how you can transpose that very easily as well. That's another really useful thing about this. If you can think in terms of degrees and you can shift that around on the board to play in any different key, that's a hugely important skill to have. You're going to get asked to transpose things from time to time, or you're going to need to do that. You're going to need to shift something, shift the key of a song that you're playing. And having that ability to see the underlying formula of any given song allows you to do that. You don't have to sort of just think about something as being stuck in the key of G and that's the only place you can play it. If you can see the formula and the pattern, you can move, a 1-6-4-5 pattern around into any key very comfortably. The other thing to cover then is, how do we play something in a minor key? Is there a whole new system? Fortunately for us, if we can learn it in the major key, we've learned all the formulas we need. We just need to change what our start point is. So if we think about the key we've just played in, G major, if we now switch our focal point to being the 6th chord in that key, instead of G as our 1, the 6th chord will now become our 1 chord. And we're now going to play in the relative key of E minor. We're now making the E chord in that sequence our 1 chord. So we will start from there. We will use all the same chords as we've just learnt in G major, but we're making the 6th chord our new 1 chord. So it will now look like this. We would count up from E minor and that would be our 1 chord. Our 2 chord now becomes this F sharp half diminished. We then make the 3 chord our G chord. The 4 chord is now A minor. The 5 chord is B minor. The new 6 chord is C. The new 7 chord is D, and then we're back to the 1 again. So that's it. Now we're playing in a minor key. Now we've shifted and we're using our knowledge of relative minor, or a shift in focus, to making the E chord our new 1 chord, and that's it. So if we're playing in a major key, our 1 would be G in this instance. That's where we would start the pattern. If we're playing in a minor key, we just shift our 1 down to what was our old 6. Okay, so here's our major key again, starting on G. But if we now shift focus again down to the E, this is our new 1 in an E minor. The 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, So again, with that, we get a whole lot of very, very common changes, progressions in a minor key. So something along the lines of a 1, 6, 7, or a 1, 7, 6, 7. And this process carries on. You can do the same thing with all the other degrees, and you can do the same process and build chord progressions with your focal point as the 2 chord or the 3 chord, and we get into sort of more of a modal way of thinking. And so again, those patterns and those harmonies are going to sound slightly different and slightly more unusual. The 2 patterns that we hear day in, day out though are the 2 we've just looked at. So your bog standard major key or your natural minor key, and the melodies and the chord progressions that are derived from those.